So I know this review is a little late, seeing as how this show ended like a month or two ago, but I knew I had to talk about it because, wow, it was way better than I was expecting. Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man pretty much took me off guard because I was not really looking forward to it. For one, it originally started off as a prequel to Homecoming, being titled Spider-Man Freshman Year, but after the showrunners wanted to tell an original story, rather than something constrained to the canon of the MCU, the show as a whole was revamped and it took around 4 years from its initial announcement to actually come out. Then the trailers for it started to drop, and I was put off by it, because of its jarring animation, and nothing within the trailers really grabbed my attention. Coupled that with general Marvel fatigue, and I was going to skip it because I had little to no faith in it at that point. But it wasn't until the whole show was finished and word of mouth started to reach me that it was actually pretty good. With that, I took a chance at watching it, and as soon as the first episode finished, I binge watched the entire thing. What initially was surprising to me was that the story here took a pretty different direction than what Spider-Man media outside of the comics does, mostly since they just do variations on the same story we've seen for decades. But as soon as we got to this,
You're Spider-Man.
my investment in the show went through the roof. While it does feel somewhat like a repeat of the Iron Man Peter story in the MCU, I do feel as though this show leads to a lot more interesting story developments and themes than in Homecoming, like with Norman twisting, with great power comes great responsibility, into something that fits his darker nature, which I think leads to some interesting internal struggles for Peter. And speaking of Norman, all the voice performances here were great, and not a single person did a bad job, but I have to give major props to Coleman Domingo as Norman Osborn. His voice perfectly fits the sly but underlying sinister nature of the character.
It's a wild, wild universe out there, and a flawed group like the Avengers isn't enough to keep us dominant in it. So, we're pushing forward on our own. We will take from the stars themselves and become as formidable as those we once revered as gods.
Funny enough, when it comes to the characters, I actually have the least to say about Peter, since for the most part, he's played out to be the good-hearted nerd we've all come to love. In general, I have more to say about the side cast than anything else. I was a little worried about Nico, though, since I thought the writers were pulling an Invincible with her, being upset at Peter when he didn't tell her that he was Spider-Man, leading to forced drama, but in actuality, that wasn't the case, and instead they used that as a point to address other feelings she had, which I think was an effective way of using that trope and not playing 100% into it. And as a whole, I thought she was actually a really cool friend, being a different kind of friend to Peter, but still providing something unique. Harry, I thought was fine. Truthfully, I don't really have much to say about him since he really didn't provide a lot in ways of development or character interaction, so he kinda just exists, and I really don't mind him. The standout character, however, was one I was not expecting, which was Lonnie. Next to Peter, Lonnie gets a majority of the screen time here and acts as the B-plot for the show. Seeing him start out as a great guy and student, then running in with the wrong crowd, going down the wrong path due to unfortunate circumstances, and etc. In ways, I actually thought his arc was stronger than Peter's, as I got pretty invested in seeing the struggles he went through, and the natural changes he went through during the course of the season. An aspect of the show I wasn't really expecting was the small amount of edge it had. There was more swearing than I expected, some darker subjects were tackled, and at points, dudes just straight up get killed.
I brought a knife to a gunfight.
Which just made the Clone Wars loving child within me smile. But that gave the show a little bit more of its own identity and displayed that the writers weren't afraid to hold back if they wanted to. But for the most part, the show is pretty mild in what it does. But those little things here and there, again, give it a little bit of personality and definitely take you off guard when they do happen. Now, I think the biggest and most noticeable issue the show has is its animation. While on one hand, I really like the art style that they're going for here, with it being like the old Spider-Man comics just thrown into a 3D space, with certain scenes even looking like they belong on the pages of a comic at times. On the other hand, the show as a whole just looks somewhat off. Like it feels both cheap and expensive at the same time, where at times characters can have fluid movement that looks great, and others where it's sluggish and choppy looking. It's difficult to tell if that's because it's a stylistic choice the creators were going for, or because of some corners having to be cut. And that's why I hesitate to outright consider this an issue, since I'm not totally sure. Whatever the case is, the show in general looked fine, and though it took a while to get used to, by the end the style grew on me, and I actually liked it. A story decision that I wasn't very keen on was how they kept some of the MCU story elements in this story, making it so that it's sort of MCU adjacent, while at the same time being its own thing. Stuff like the Sokovia Accords happened and are talked about, but at no point in time within the story do they play a factor. It's just dropped with no explanation. The general MCU stuff being in this story just baffles me more than anything else, and more than likely will confuse casual viewers into wondering if this is or isn't in the MCU. While characters like Harry and Nico are decent, it felt as though both of them weren't as fleshed out as they could have been. We get hints here and there of what it's like with Harry being neglected by his father, who takes more of an interest in Peter, but that's never really talked about or really mentioned. Nico, on the other hand, is in a foster family and shows some abandonment issues, which are touched on between her and Peter, but at the same time, it felt as though it wasn't entirely enough. Like we were only scratching the surface with her story. Both of these characters weren't bad at all, and it's most likely these little nuggets of character drama are going to be developed and focused on in the future seasons, but since other characters like Lonnie get a lot of development and a lot of screen time, I was kinda hoping there would be a little bit more for Peter's closest friends. The last thing I take issue with is something that's more of a personal preference rather than an actual problem, which happens to do with how Peter got his powers, which is because of a time loop created by Doctor Strange, which I'm not so sure if I like that, because the whole point of Spider-Man from the very beginning was that anybody can wear the mask, anybody could have been bitten by the spider, but it was Peter because of chance. Making it so that it was kind of always destined for him to become Spider-Man feels a little weird and kinda goes against the character, but in the way his origin was handled here and some of the radical changes that were done, make me not hate the destiny part in this as much, but it still feels off. Anyways, all in all, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man surprised me. Working past the strange visuals and odd story decisions, this turned out to be a pretty good show overall, with likable characters, a decent story, and a good setup for future plotlines. I originally didn't care for this show whatsoever, and now I'm eagerly looking forward to the second season whenever that comes out. But until then, take care, and I'll see you all in the next video.